Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always excited to dig into these fascinating stories.
Well, today we're tackling leadership, and I think we've got a pretty juicy story to work with Korah's rebellion from the Book of Numbers.
Ah, yes, a classic tale of ambition, conflict, and the age-old question of, what makes a leader truly legitimate?
Right. Like, how do you actually earn that authority, especially when you're dealing with, well, think about it, a whole bunch of Israelites wandering through the desert?
Escape from slavery, no less. You've got Moses leading the way, chosen by God, and his brother Aaron as the high priest. You'd think things would be pretty straightforward.
You'd think. But that's where Korah comes in and throws a wrench in the works.
And not just Korah. He brings a posse, 250 other leaders, to challenge Moses and Aaron. This isn't just some minor grumbling. This is a full-blown rebellion against their authority.
It makes you wonder what was going through their minds, right? What were they hoping to achieve?
That's where it gets interesting, because it wasn't necessarily about Moses' personality or even specific decisions he made. It was deeper than that.
Like they were questioning the whole system.
Exactly. This rebellion
Mm.
challenged the very foundation of Moses' authority. Like, where did it come from? Was it legitimate? It raises the question, how do leaders earn that trust, that recognition that makes people willing to follow them?
Okay, so let's talk about Moses for a minute. How did he build that legitimacy, especially in such a, well, chaotic situation? I mean, leading a massive group of people through the desert can't be easy.
Not easy at all. But the way Moses handles this challenge, it's surprising. Instead of immediately resorting to force or trying to silence his critics, he does something unexpected.
Okay, you've got to tell me, what does he do?
He basically calls for a public test, a demonstration to prove that God is backing Aaron's role as high priest.
Right, the famous staff incident. Aaron's staff blossoms, the others don't. But some people might see that as a bit of a power play, you know? Like, was it truly divine intervention or a clever manipulation?
It's a valid question, and it brings up this whole idea of how leadership operates, even today. On one hand, it could seem like a strategic move to quell the opposition.
But you're saying there's more to it than that.
Well, if you look at Moses' character throughout the story, his deep belief in God's guidance is constant. It's not a stretch to think he genuinely believed this test would reveal God's will.
So he's essentially saying, look, this isn't just about me, it's about a higher authority that we all believe in.
Exactly. And think about the context leading a massive group of people through incredibly difficult circumstances. He needed to show them that his leadership wasn't arbitrary. It was grounded in something bigger than himself.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about building trust, especially in times of uncertainty. But he also chose a very public way to do this, right? Everyone could see the outcome.
Absolutely. That transparency is key. It reinforces this idea of fairness and legitimacy. He's not hiding anything. He's inviting scrutiny.
Instead of shutting down dissent, he's using it to strengthen his position. That's pretty counterintuitive, right?
It is. And it offers a great lesson for modern leaders. What if we view disagreements not as threats, but as opportunities to show our values, build consensus, and strengthen our teams?
Okay, that's a pretty big shift in perspective. So legitimacy isn't just about claiming authority, it's about earning it through actions that resonate with your followers.
Precisely. And the story of Korah highlights another crucial element: integrity.
Now, when we talk about integrity, we're talking about more than just being honest, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's about aligning your actions with your words. Consistency, fairness in decision-making, even when it's tough. It's walking the walk. And Moses was known for this.
So do you think part of Korah's downfall was a lack of perceived integrity? After all, he was attacking the very essence of Moses' leadership, not specific actions.
That's a fascinating point. And it brings up a really important question for us as leaders today, understanding the motivations behind challenges to our authority. Was Korah driven by genuine concern for the community or something else?
And how do we as leaders figure that out? Because sometimes it's hard to tell if someone's offering genuine feedback or just trying to undermine you.
That's a challenge we'll dive into in the next part of our deep dive. How to manage those conflicts effectively, discern motivations, and respond in a way that strengthens, not weakens, your leadership.
Can't wait to unpack that. But before we move on, let's take a moment to reflect on these ideas of legitimacy, transparency, and integrity.
It's easy to get caught up in the story, but how do these concepts play out in our own lives?
Yeah, because we might not be leading Israelites through the desert, but we all face challenges to our authority in different ways. Think about a time when your leadership was questioned at work, in a volunteer group, anywhere really.
How did you respond? What were your guiding principles? Did you act with integrity, with transparency, with a genuine desire to serve those you were leading?
Some tough questions to ponder, but essential for anyone who wants to grow as a leader. And that's what we'll keep exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
Looking forward to it. Let's pick this back up after a quick break.
We don't really do breaks on these deep dives. We just keep the conversation flowing.
Oh, right. Of course, eager to continue.
Me too. Let's dive back in.
So we've seen how Moses, when his leadership's challenged, goes for transparency, appeals to a higher power to, kind of solidify his position. But let's shift gears a bit. How can WE, as leaders, in any setting, deal with those times when our authority is questioned? It's bound to happen.
It's funny you mentioned that because I was just reading about different leadership styles, and it made me think about Moses. Would you say he was more of an authoritative leader, someone who's clearly in charge, or was there a collaborative side to him too?
Ooh, that's a good connection. It's easy to see Moses as just, the strong authority figure, especially with, well, the whole Korah rebellion thing.
Yeah.
But looking closer, there are hints of him working with others too.
Like what, for example?
Think about how Moses always went to God for guidance. He wasn't making decisions alone. He was seeking input, trying to align his actions with, well, what he believed was a higher wisdom. That's a kind of collaboration, isn't it? Getting a broader perspective.
So even the most powerful leader doesn't have all the answers. Seeking out different viewpoints is important.
Exactly. And remember, Moses had a team too. He had those 70 elders to help him govern. That shows a willingness to delegate, to empower others, to share leadership.
It's not just about having the power, it's about using it wisely, trusting others. Which brings us back to something we touched on earlier, understanding why our authority is being challenged. Like, is it constructive criticism or are they trying to undermine us? Sometimes it's hard to tell.
It's like walking a tightrope, isn't it? Discernment is key. Think about who's challenging you. Have they generally been respectful, wanting to contribute? Or are they always negative, looking out for themselves?
Past experience with the person can tell you a lot.
Absolutely. But even if someone's been difficult in the past, it's still important to, go in with an open mind. Listen.
So don't just assume the worst.
Right. Because sometimes even the most challenging people can have valid points. It's separating the message from the messenger.
Active listening, then. Really trying to grasp their perspective, even if we don't like how they're saying it.
Exactly. Sometimes just acknowledging their feelings helps. You might disagree, but you can say something like, I get that you're frustrated with this. I understand why you feel that way.
Validating their emotions, even if you don't agree with their conclusion.
Right. And it shows empathy, respect. That builds trust, helps find common ground. So we've talked about figuring out their motives and active listening. What about when someone's just plain hostile, disrespectful?
Yeah, how do you handle that?
That's where boundaries are crucial. And a lot of leaders struggle with this, especially if they don't like conflict.
Oh, me too. I'd rather just smooth things over, avoid confrontation.
It's a natural instinct. But as leaders, we have a responsibility not just to ourselves, but to the group, to the organization.
We can't let people walk all over us.
Right. Tolerating bad behavior just sends the message that it's okay. It creates a toxic environment where people feel unsafe, like they can't speak up.
So how do you actually set these boundaries?
It depends. It might be a calm but firm statement like, I hear you, but I won't be spoken to like that. Or setting limits like no interrupting or no personal attacks.
Sometimes you might even have to, ask someone to leave the meeting, right? If they just can't be respectful, maybe it's better to cool things down.
Exactly. Setting boundaries isn't about being mean or punishing. It's about protecting yourself and the group's well-being. It's about creating that safe space where everyone can contribute without fear.
And that brings us to something huge, managing our own emotional responses.
Oh, yes. That's a tough one.
I know I've let my emotions get the better of me in those heated moments.
It's normal to feel defensive, even angry, when your authority is questioned. But as leaders, we need to learn to stay calm, even under pressure. Self-awareness and emotional regulation, those are key skills.
So more meditation?
Mindfulness helps, but it's also about recognizing what sets you off. What are your triggers?
Like when someone questions your competence or tries to make your ideas look bad in front of everyone.
Exactly. Once you know your triggers, you can plan how to handle them. Take a few deep breaths, choose your words carefully, maybe even step away for a minute to gather your thoughts.
And it's okay to ask for help, right? Like talk to a mentor or a colleague, get a different perspective.
Absolutely. We all need support sometimes, even the most experienced leaders. Leadership isn't about being perfect, it's about being human. We learn and grow as we go.
That's actually really reassuring. We've talked about handling these external challenges, but there's also the internal stuff, right? Those battles in our own minds.
You got it. And sometimes those are even tougher to handle. That's what we'll explore next. The inner critic, self-doubt, and how self-compassion plays a role in leadership.
Because, let's be real, those inner voices can be louder than anyone else's.
So true. And a lot of leaders struggle with that. But the good news is there are ways to quiet those negative thoughts and build a more supportive inner dialogue. We'll talk about those next.
I'm all ears. Let's get into it. Okay, so we've talked a lot about those external challenges to our authority, from, full-blown rebellions to those little jabs that make you doubt yourself. But what about the stuff going on in our own heads? The internal struggles.
Yeah, that's often where the real work of leadership happens, right? You can
Mhm.
project confidence and handle pressure from the outside, but there's a whole other battle going on internally.
Totally. Is self-doubt just part of being a leader? Or can you actually, quiet that inner critic?
I think it's a bit of both. Self-doubt is normal, especially when you're pushing yourself, trying new things, but you can't let it stop you or it'll undermine everything you're trying to do.
Right. So is it just about, positive thinking? Slap on a smile and pretend the doubts aren't there?
That might work for a little while, but it's not a long-term solution. In fact, trying to ignore those negative thoughts can make them even stronger.
Okay, so if ignoring them doesn't work, what do you do? How do you actually deal with those self-sabotaging thoughts?
One way is to, well, think of them like unwelcome guests. You acknowledge they're there, but you don't let them take over.
So hey, self-doubt, nice of you to drop by. I'm going to let you sit over there while I get this done.
Exactly. Create some distance between those thoughts and who you are.
Because a lot of times those thoughts aren't even true. They're just leftover stuff from the past, limiting beliefs that we've picked up along the way.
You got it. That's why self-awareness is so important. Pay attention to those thoughts. When do they show up? What triggers them? And are they really true based on who you are and what you can do, NOW?
I like that fact-checking the inner critic. A lot of times, if you really examine those thoughts, they fall apart.
Right. And that's where self-compassion comes in. Instead of beating yourself up for having those doubts, treat yourself kindly, like you would a friend.
Be your own cheerleader instead of your own worst enemy.
Exactly. Because leading is hard. You will mess up sometimes. You will feel insecure. You will question yourself. And that's okay. It's all part of the process.
That's such an important message. There's this pressure to be perfect, to have all the answers, to never show weakness. But we're all human. We all make mistakes.
For sure. And accepting that imperfection is what helps us grow as leaders. It makes us relatable, authentic.
Speaking of authenticity, you mentioned something earlier about vision. Moses had this vision of leading his people to the promised land. It wasn't just about appealing to a higher power. It was about having this bigger goal, this inspiring purpose.
You're right. Vision is what drives effective leadership. It gives you purpose, direction, something to work towards. It helps you through challenges and setbacks.
So how do we, as leaders, tap into that? Vision can feel kind of abstract sometimes.
It can be a little elusive, but think of it like a compass. It guides you, helps you make decisions, especially when things get tough.
Okay, I like that analogy. So how do we build that internal compass, that sense of direction for ourselves and those we're leading?
Start with some basic questions.
Yeah.
What are you passionate about? What kind of impact do you want to make? What kind of legacy do you want to leave?
I love that. Thinking bigger than just the day-to-day tasks and connecting with a larger purpose, it's easy to get lost in the details and forget about the bigger picture.
Exactly. And your vision doesn't have to be huge, world-changing. It can be something like creating a better work environment, mentoring someone, making a difference in your community.
It's about living your values and using your leadership to make things better, however you define that.
Yes. And once you have that vision, you have to communicate it.
So it's not just about having a vision in your head, it's about sharing it with others in a way that inspires them, gets them on board.
Right. A shared vision is what gets people working together towards the same goal. It creates unity.
Wow, this has been a really thought-provoking conversation. I feel like we've covered so much ground. Before we wrap up, I want to touch on self-compassion again. Why is that so important for leaders, especially when they're facing tough times?
Because being a leader is a marathon, not a sprint. You will stumble. You will doubt yourself. You'll want to quit sometimes. And that's when self-compassion becomes so important.
It helps you get back up, dust yourself off, and keep going.
Exactly. Self-compassion isn't about making excuses. It's about accepting that you're human, learning from your mistakes, and treating yourself with kindness.
It's remembering that we're all works in progress, and that's a good thing.
Yes. And that's something I really hope our listeners will take away from this deep dive. It's okay to embrace the messiness, the challenges, even the failures. They all help us grow and learn.
Because ultimately, it's not about being perfect, it's about being authentic, showing up as you are, flaws and all, and using your leadership to make a positive difference.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Remember, leadership is a journey, not a destination. Keep learning, keep growing, keep trying to be the best leader you can be.
This deep dive into Korah's rebellion has been truly insightful. Thank you for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. I hope our listeners will keep thinking about these lessons and how they can apply them to their own leadership journeys.
Until next time, keep leading with courage, compassion, and a clear vision for the future.